that isn't necessarily open or ready or available to hear what you're having to say. And so that the pushback to that can sometimes be greater. Also because it's more direct, it's more direct, it's more immediate. Like we feel when someone preaches or speaks something, it like hits us, where we are and we can have an immediate reaction to that. So that's harder. But if churches aren't speaking to this, then again, I think we are failing to follow Jesus, the path that Jesus has laid for us and called us to follow. Again, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus shares this great commission at the very end, right? The very, very last few sentences of the Gospel of Matthew is what is known as the Great Commission. And it is after Jesus has been crucified, died, and has resurrected, and he has encountered his disciples. And it's just such a rich few statements. And obviously this isn't a study of this text, so I don't have time to go into all of it. But one of the things he says, go and baptize, all nations in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And he says this, and teach them to obey everything I have commanded you. And I think a lot of times we forget what that looks like. It means that we actually have to teach and talk about what Jesus has asked us to do. And while we then can look and see that Jesus doesn't say anything very specifically, right? The word racism is never used in the Gospels. However, Jesus has encounters with people of other races, of other religious affiliations, and the way that Jesus addresses them is so telling, and we have to teach that. So that means actually talking about it. We don't just get to, hide behind some aspects of our faith and kind of make it neutral. Jesus is very clear about what he asks us to do as Christians. And again, if we're not willing to talk about it and teach it, then we're not helping to further the kingdom, which is actually the point of the church. So we're really missing then our overall call if we're not willing to address some of the things that we're seeing. And that's a burden that's the burden of the church. It's the mission of the church. It's something the church needs to constantly be critical of itself around how we are doing this and how can we do this better.
Well, Elizabeth, that leads perfectly into my next question. I was visiting with my wife, Lauren, last night, who is a fan of yours. And I said that we were interviewing you. And she said, well, you have to ask her one question. And she had it was a real visceral response. She turned and looked at me and said, you have to ask her how she is approaching having a dialogue about racism in the current state of our nation with your kids. You're a mother of 3. Share with us how you're talking about this with your kiddos.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Even as a minister, so much of what we say is our first congregation, if you will, is the congregation in our home. It's our family. And if we're not doing the work in our family, then we can't be expected to do it well in the congregation as a whole. So yeah, that's super convicting to me. We have 3 kids. Our oldest is 7 and our youngest is 3. And then we have a 5-year-old in the middle. And so we're real busy and always going. And my husband and I, thankfully, are on the same page when it comes to a lot of this stuff. These are topics that we talk about often. And so it was very natural for us to decide that we were going to talk to our children about them. One of the resources that I have been reading specifically around how to talk to children about race is a book called Raising White Kids. And I cannot remember the author of it, so I'm so sorry. But that has been very helpful to me and to my husband. Even before though, part of what we've always realized is that if we don't name our whiteness, then we are not teaching our children to understand their privilege. And, we have a son. Our oldest is a son. And so he has really then multiple types of privilege that he will enter the world with. Then we have 2 daughters, and they, again, also have multiple types of privilege. So if we're not naming then our privilege and the variety of ways that we experience it, then we're not allowing our kids to understand that they have it. So that really for us has been the first thing. And that means naming our whiteness. That means pointing out, what books and shows our kids are watching, to be aware of how the different genders are represented, how different races are represented. From the very beginning, we've been very intentional about purchasing children's books that portray a number of main characters of color, whether that's Black or brown. And we really are trying to then show and reveal to our kids not only just kind of general diversity, but also the fact that as white kids, we're aware of that and we're aware of our privilege when it comes to that. I don't know if we have time, but I'd like to share a story about a conversation I had with my son.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
So he asked me what Nazis were recently.
And how old remind me how old your son?
Yeah, he's 7. So 7 years old. He just finished first grade at a public school here in Dallas. He's 7, like I said. So he asked me, what are Nazis? And the only real connection that I can think of that he has had to the only exposure to Nazis that he's had, and this is going to sound so funny maybe, is through The Sound of Music, that movie. My kids love that movie, and but the Nazis are a very big part of that movie. It really, if you look at it, is not a movie about 7 children that sing together in one family. It really is a movie about the movement, about Nazism and the resistance to that and how that plays out across one family. So they love that movie. That's been, in my opinion, or my awareness, his only exposure. But we were on a walk, and we had passed a place where someone had graffitied the Nazi symbol, that little black spider.
The swastika, yeah.
Yeah, the swastika. Thank you. And so at the time, we had talked about it. And so we were passing that place again, and he remembered that we had talked about it then. And he said, what are Nazis? And so I explained, again, roughly, keeping in mind he was 7, that it was a group of people who didn't like anybody who wasn't like them. And that included people who believed differently, so specifically Jewish people. And that included people who looked differently, so specifically people who had different skin color, including different nationalities in Eastern Europe, as well as Black people. That included people who loved different people. So if you were gay, all sorts of things like that. And I kind of explained. And so then we started talking about the people in our life that we knew who Nazis wouldn't like, right? He started kind of naming people that fell into those categories. And he, as we kind of talked through all that, he kind of said, well, I would go and we would protect those people, wouldn't we? And I said, well, sure. Yeah, we would certainly try to. And he goes, but Nazis would like us, wouldn't they? And it took me aback at first.
Sure.
Because he was saying something that I was like, ugh, that's, are you allowed to say that? Like, he was kind of like, right? We would be okay because Nazis would like us. And this is again where that book, Raising White Kids, was very helpful to me. Because the author addresses this kind of situation with her daughter, one time where her daughter says but we're safe because we're white. And so in that moment, I just again realized that this was part of my son's own his own racial identity was forming around these types of conversations. And so I said, at first, on the surface, maybe the Nazis would think that we were like them. And then I said, but Nazis don't really like people who didn't agree with them and who didn't like them. So they actually wouldn't like us at all either, because our family does not think what Nazis did and unfortunately are doing is good or right. So they wouldn't like us because we would actually disagree with them. And I don't know, honestly, if that was right or wrong. And so anybody who's listening might be like, you've traumatized your child, or, we're very insensitive. But in that moment, it was a way for me to remind him that, yes, we have privilege because of our socioeconomic status, because of the color of our skin, because of his gender, because, we, we're, I can't think of how to say it. We have lots of privilege, basically. So yes, we have lots of privilege. However, because of our privilege, we use it to support and to be thoughtful about how we use our privilege, in terms of caring for and loving those who do not enjoy the same privilege we do.
What a great story! I mean, thank you for sharing. And we'll look up the book and we'll share it in our show notes as well, so people can share with their kiddos.
So we wanted to make sure that people are able to find you if you are, if they want to find you on social media or any websites. What would be the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Well, first of all, the author is Jennifer Harvey, so I just looked it up. Raising Right Kids, but I am very active on Instagram. I guess I'm a product of my time a little bit. So I'm active on Instagram. My handle is EEMose, EEMOSE. And I'm on Facebook as Elizabeth Moseley. I have a Twitter account, but I'm not as active, on Twitter. So you won't see a lot of what I'm doing.
We'll find you on the gram. We'll just find you on the gram. We can do that. But we do want to thank you for coming on and sharing your experience, sharing your stories. We hope to be in contact a little bit more. We want to thank you for that.
Yeah, it was my privilege.
This is Deconstructing Dallas. Shawn Williams, Ryan Trimble will be right back right after this. Welcome back, Deconstructing Dallas. Shawn Williams, Ryan Trimble. Ryan, I am so thankful that you were able to coordinate with Reverend Moseley, because we really needed to hear what she had to say.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm grateful. Thank you, Lauren, for the kick under the table to make sure to ask her about how she's talking to her kids about this. I think it's really important. We've been working on that here in our household. We've got little ones, but it's never too early to start these conversations. And so, really appreciate her coming on.
Well, I guess we have not said that we have a specific number of interviews we're going to do with the series, but I do think we'll have at least one more guest that we're working on. So we won't tease that one just yet, but I think it's another voice that we want to hear. But again, I'm thankful for Reverend Moseley, and please, if you get a chance to see her, please let her know how much we appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been Deconstructing Dallas. Again, our series, Where Do We Go From Here? Based on Dr. Martin Luther King's book of the same title, with the subtitle Community, Chaos or Community. And we really are thankful for our bosses, our coworkers, our listeners. This has been a very emotional series for us. Ryan and I have had a number of conversations offline about this. We've been up at 1:00 in the morning planning for this. And so we thank everyone who's taken the opportunity to listen. We don't take it lightly. Please share this with your friends. Please share this with your family.